Welcome to the Hero Maker podcast. I'm Andrea Schreeman, writer, director, EP, living in LA.
I'm Jennifer Morrison, and I currently serve as the Commissioner of Public Safety for the state of Vermont.
We are here to seek out and tell the full story of our friends who were murdered in college, Rachael Raver and Warren Fulton III.
We really need to make sure that their deaths were not in vain and that every possible lesson and improvement for the system can be squeezed from the retelling of the circumstances that ultimately led to the identification of their killer. Hello, and welcome back to the Hero Maker podcast. In this episode, Andy and I were privileged to speak with Velda Jefferson, who lost her daughter Tina in a violent event committed by the same killer who took Rachael and Warren. Tina was the first known murder victim of Alfredo Prieto. She was killed 6 months before our friends and just 20 minutes away in Arlington, Virginia. At the time, and for many years in the late 80s and early 90s, police did not see a connection between the events. 12 years later, in the year 2000, the two events were finally linked through advancements in DNA technology. The Jeffersons went on to form a meaningful bond with both the Raver family and the Fultons. Personally, I was very inspired by how Velda leaned on her faith to get her through the overwhelming grief of losing Tina in such a violent and sudden manner. I hope you'll find inspiration here too.
We're so happy to have you here, Velda, and I'm so honored to be introducing you to Jennifer. Did you, by any chance, click on and see what Jennifer's doing as a profession these days?
Yes, I did.
So she has had a career in law enforcement, and Jennifer, Velda is Tina Jefferson's mom, and Tina was the young woman that we didn't know, but we discovered had been murdered just down the road from where we lost Warren and Rachael, and had also been killed in 1988. Of course, we didn't know this till many 12 years later, till 2000, when the DNA hits connected the two murders. So there's just a really beautiful story of when the three families realized that they were interconnected and how that altered their journey and their experience. And Velda, I thought that today maybe we could begin by you just sharing a little bit about Tina. Veronica was her
given name, but we just
her given name.
Tina.
Yeah, and just introduce us to your daughter. Tell us a little bit about her.
Okay, well, Tina was born on November 1st, 1964. She was the second daughter of mine, and she grew up in Lawton, Oklahoma, and also in Germany, and then back again in Lawton, because we were a military family. We moved around, but eventually we settled here. Coming back here in 1977, and she was 12 years old and was in junior high school. And while in junior high school, she played basketball. And then in high school, she also was on the cheerleading squad, which they called at that time the pom-pom squad. She graduated from high school with a 4-point score, and she went on to OSU, Oklahoma State University, that summer right after she had graduated. And while at OSU, her grades were okay, but she found out she had to study just a little bit harder. And she joined the sorority Delta Sigma Thetas. And basically, she was a good girl. I had no problems out of Tina whatsoever. She was friendly and very open, to meeting people and everything. And she was active in the church.
And then how did she end up in Washington, D.C.?
Okay. Just before she graduated from OSU, she was recruited by the CIA. Her field was accounting. And so that's where they hired her, in the accounting part of the CIA. She had an uncle up there that was stationed in the DC area. He was in the Navy at the time. So we knew she had family up there. So we felt like it was okay for her to go. Crystal, even though they had a large age gap between them, went up to stay with her the first summer she was up there. And my older daughter and myself, we went up to visit her.
So Crystal is your third daughter, and she lived with Tina?
Just briefly for the summer. But when Tina was in college, she would visit her during spring break and just hang out with her.
Got it. Say a little bit about her personality, because I remember some wonderful things that you told me before.
She was a very loving, caring person, very bubbly. She had a smile. Everybody says that she just would light up the room when she walked into it. She was very outgoing, a little outspoken.
Can you tell us an example? Because a little chuckle there. So I wonder if you're thinking about anything in particular. What kind of outspoken? And it reminds me, we haven't mentioned her car. Tell us also about the car that she was driving, because it does come up in the profiles. I thought it was such a great expression of her outspoken personality.
She did not mind saying what was on her mind, in a nice way. She could hold her own in an argument. Her car was her gift to herself when she graduated college. And it was a Camaro, yes, a red Camaro. And she really liked that car. And it was red. Her sorority colors were red and white. And so she picked a red car.
Awesome. So your husband's no longer with us.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. When did we lose him?
In 2007.
Got it. So he wasn't alive for the trial.
No, he was gone by the time we had the trial. He passed away that April before the trial.
But it probably was some great relief to know that the man that had killed his daughter was in custody and they had discovered who he was.
Oh, yes.
Jen, what questions do you have for Velda?
First, I wanted to say hi, Velda, and I can't believe all these years have gone by and we haven't actually met, but I think you're very brave to tell your daughter's story and help us understand the situation, because I think there's a lot of lessons in your strength and in your grace and in your faith. So I might have just given you the answers to the first question I would ask you, but what do you attribute your ability to not just cope with, but indeed in many ways share some light with the world in the wake of such a horrible tragedy?
As you said, my faith is my strength. And if I can help someone in any little way to recognize and to get through a horrible event in their life, it's worth it.
Did you have people helping you the way you're helping others?
Yes, I did. At first, I had my natural family, and then I had my church family. And there were a couple ladies that were older than I was that I had known for many, many years. And they would just encourage me. They would say, I'm praying for you. You can make it. You'll be all right. And basically, that was how I got through it, with prayer and leaning on encouragement from other people.
Right. Was there ever a time where your anger or grief felt like even prayer might not be enough?
I can't say that, no. Because when I first found out about it, I was at work. And when they took me off to the side to tell me, the first thing I did was fall on my knees. And I said, God, I can't do this by myself. You're going to have to help me. So I've always leaned and depend on him.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what the death notification was like? Who is they? Who pulled you aside and gave you the news?
Okay, well, my husband and some of his cousins had gone on a road trip, so he was not at home. And like I said, I was at work, and my supervisor came to me and says, we need you to go to the guardhouse, which was outside of the plant. He told me something happened to a guy, and we just need you to come and be with us. So I said, okay. And when I got outside and went to the gate, I saw my husband's best friend. And I said, Bill, what are you doing here? And then by that time, my husband's commanding officer showed up and he says, I've got something to tell you. And because my husband was gone, I thought it was him. And I said, Jeff. And they said, no, Tina. And I just fell apart.
I can only imagine. Was there anything in that moment where you're being told of your daughter's death that you wish had gone differently? Or perhaps the converse? Was the messenger of the news important? Was the way the news was shared with you part of your path to healing?
Probably so, because like I said, he was my husband's best friend, one of his best friends. So that meant he was always at our house. And so Tina called him Uncle Bill. And even his commanding officer, we had actions, together, interacted together. So there could not have been a better way for me to find out than through them.
Yeah.
And usually that's what the military does. And if my husband had passed, they would have come out to the house and told me that. And then after they were there, my pastor, he was out there also. And he prayed with me and for me.
Wow. That's a lot of support.
Your pastor was there on that very first day or in those few moments?
No, the very first day in the hours. And then because my oldest daughter lived about 45 minutes away, he and his wife drove me to where she lived so that I could tell her what had happened.
That's an incredible support network between your church family, your military family, and of course your biological family.
Velda, your husband, Jeff, obviously had the same support systems that you did.
Yes.
How the information got to him was going to be different because he was traveling. But in terms of the way you each coped with the loss of Tina, maybe you could say a little bit about how it impacted him differently, or even your other daughters differently, because again, he had similar support systems, but maybe didn't have the same experience you did.
Well, for him, it was kind of a guilt trip that he wasn't there to be able to protect his daughter, to save his daughter. And so he felt bad about that. Crystal was so young. Her friends helped her to get through a lot of it. And of course, Joyce, she relied on her husband and the church also.
So I guess I'm not fully aware of what I think Andy might be alluding to. Did your husband, maybe, I'm asking simply because I have encountered people with such a breadth of reactions to sudden, unexpected death, never mind tragic murder. I know from firsthand experience that the way people cope is never the same way twice. And I wondered if you could draw me a little bit more of a word picture of how your husband felt or acted or responded in light of this. And sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, you're fine. He was angry. He was very, very angry. Like I said, he was angry and felt bad because he wasn't able to protect her. He was angry because this was his daughter, which he loved very much. He was just really angry. And Crystal had some anger also. Even now, she does not like to talk about what happened. She will talk about her sister and the relationship that they had together. But when it comes to this part, she does not like to talk about it.
I hope I get to meet Crystal sometime. She's definitely been avoiding me.
I should not have spoken for her. And I thought, oh, well, she would, after all this time, and it wasn't about him. It was about Tina, that she would be able to do it, but no.
Yeah. So there was a long period of not knowing.
True.
Not knowing anything.
Who or what? That's right.
Yeah. And it was many, many years. And then you lived so far away.
Yes.
which must have really contributed to that helplessness,
Yes.
feeling of helplessness. So, can you just share a little bit about what it was like interacting with the police department? And did you try to pursue answers? Did Jeff try to pursue answers?
He took it upon himself to try to do everything that he could to find out if they had any new information, where they stood on different things. And he would always call the police department in DC just to see where they were. I guess he was more or less trying to protect me by not forcing me to do any of that. So he took care of all of the interactions with the police department.
I'm trying to remember. Rachel and Warren were being investigated in Fairfax County, and which was it, Arlington?
Yes, Arlington.
So it was a different police department. And
Yes.
for some reason, maybe you can speak to this, in the things that I've seen and read, the police department had this idea that Tina must have known her killer. Do you remember this part of it?
Yes, they did speculate that she knew her killer or whatever. They questioned her male friends, which came to no end, because anyone that really knew her would not have really done that, have treated her in such a manner. I always figured it was someone that she did not know.
Did the police ever leave you or your husband with the impression that they were engaged in any type of victim blaming? Like, why was she where she was by herself, or anything that you perceived as victim blaming?
No, they did not do a victim blaming that I can remember.
Well, that's good, because back in the day, that wasn't all that uncommon. So I'm happy to hear that.
But I remember seeing an account, and this was on one of the TV shows,
Yeah.
that there was a police officer
Yes.
that had seen her car
Yes.
and had followed the car for a while, but he was off duty.
Yes.
And so he, even though it
Didn't
looked
do
like
it.
there might have been something was strange about it, he decided not
Yes.
to pull them over.
Yes.
Do you remember
I
this?
do.
Can you say more about that?
I do remember that. And that kind of made me angry, because I thought, well, if it was his daughter, or even go so far to say, if it was a white girl, would he have stopped? Because that made all the difference. Had he had pulled them over, she would probably be alive today. So that I did have some bad thoughts about.
I think a lot of people did. I mean, and I heard about it after the fact.
Mhm.
I'm sure this officer who was off duty had his reasoning of why he didn't think that was a good idea. Jen, maybe you could, I don't know if it's appropriate to say something about that.
Well, without knowing the specifics, listening to just what the two of you were saying, my first question was he in his personal vehicle? In which case, how are you going to, quote, pull someone over
Mhm.
in a car that doesn't have blue lights or sirens? And I think we're talking an era where it was before people commonly had cell phones. If they did, they were the size of
Oh, yeah.
a knapsack. So the logistics of, quote, pulling over someone while you're off duty back then aren't the same. You wouldn't have a police radio in your personal car to just let headquarters know that you're following a suspicious vehicle. So that's out the window. You probably didn't have a cell phone back then.
Mhm.
So by the time that person may have stopped at a phone booth and called in, they would have lost sight of the vehicle. And you certainly would never have been trained to forcibly stop a vehicle in your personal car if you're not in uniform, properly armed and equipped. So it seems to me like an incredibly unlikely situation that could have happened to do that. To me, the fact that the person has that much of a recollection says to me something really seemed off. That officer's spidey sense was going on high gear. And if that same scenario happened today, a different outcome may very well have happened because of the use of cell phones and the ability to be an active witness and actively engaged without having to confront someone
Yeah.
in your personal vehicle, in your street clothes.
I agree.
Yeah, but it is definitely one of those near misses and
Yeah.
weird
Yes.
things that happened, because there are so many of them in many of the stories that I've heard from different families. I do want to just insert a few more facts that I remember. That Tina was abducted from outside of a grocery store. She had gone grocery shopping. I remember that.
Yes.
And I remember that when they found her car, there was ice cream melting in the car. So this was something that kind of went against this idea that she was someone she knew, because if she bought ice cream,
Yeah.
it was clear that she was going to the grocery store and then going home,
Yes.
or going somewhere that had a freezer at the very least. And then her body was found behind an elementary school, was what I remember reading.
Yes.
Yeah. So when we were talking about what it was like before you had any information and that 12-year span, and then all of a sudden, after 12 years of nothing, they find out that the same person who killed her had to have killed these other two
Mhm.
people nearby, 20 minutes away. So that was a big,
What was that
was a
like?
big change.
Yeah, what was that like?
Yeah.
It was, I guess you could say, surreal to know. And then it made me feel bad also that he had done it to someone else. It just, I don't know, it just, it was just a bad feeling.
When was the first time that you actually met someone from the Raver family?
After they found out that we were connected in that way, I believe Mrs. Raver called my husband and they talked, and then he would talk quite often with Dee Dee and also her brother Matt. And when I was home, I would talk to them also, because at the time, I was still working. So it was comforting to know that someone else knew what I was going, not just me, but what we were going through as a family. And they seemed to be just as close knit as we were. So it was comforting to know that we weren't by ourselves in this instance. And when we met them, they were just lovely people.
They were. They are.
You told me, tell me about that night after you met Veronica Raver.
We were both in New York to do, oh, what was his name? He had a ball, Montel
Williams.
Williams, yes. It might have been after we did his show. And we had a hotel room. And Miss Raver says, well, we can stay together. And I says, well, okay, we even slept in the same bed together. We just had formed that bond, that close bond. And so it was a really, really nice evening that we shared.
So even in the midst of still such unknown progress, maybe, but tragedy, there can still be these moments of great joy.
Yes, yes. And it truly was.
Yeah, that must have brought you a lot of comfort, I'm sure.
It did. It really did. And then when she passed, that was sad.
Yeah.
She seemed to be the one in the family that, between her and Dee Dee, that kept things moving.
But she passed after the trial, because wasn't she at the trial?
Yes. Oh, yes. She passed after the trial.
But you're saying you've had enough of a relationship with her that losing her it was sad to lose
yes.
a friend and someone who was that kind of bound.
Yeah. Connected together.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because one of the other interesting facts is that your daughter was actually killed on her daughter's birthday.
Yes. Yes.
And so it was this revelation that once you met, that for the last 12 years, you had been grieving on the same day.
Same day, yes. And then also with Veronica and Veronica.
Yeah, that was her name.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you do a lot of those interviews and shows, and what was that like? And was that helpful or was it frustrating?
It was helpful in a way, because this was before we knew who it was. And also to help get the story out, and also to always have hope, to let people know that we still had hope. We had not forgotten, and that we were willing to do whatever we needed to do to bring justice forth.
To continue to have hope is very, very important, because I could see very easily where someone could be just emotionally, physically shut down and immobile and want to crawl under a rock. And that's not going to help cases get solved.
No, I mean, but there are a lot of people for whom that is their only reaction. And not everybody has the same coping mechanisms, such as faith and family and multiple layers of support that Velda had. I mean, Velda spoke about Jeff's regret at not being able to do something before the crime to protect his daughter, to save his daughter's life. And then in the wake of it, the desire that I've experienced is that the family members want to do something. They do not want to sit idly by and just wait and trust that law enforcement is doing everything they can. They want to be part of the solution. So I completely identify with what she's saying, that this felt like there was always hope that we'd reach a new person by a television program who hadn't heard about this or didn't know we were looking for information. There's always one more stone to overturn. And it's the same way that an investigator feels when they keep coming up empty, is that they just keep looking for another stone to turn over, to find a clue, anything, a trace of something, to try and start connecting some dots. And so it's almost like the family, in what Velda's describing, is operating in parallel to what I imagine the investigators were doing. And remember, at this point, it was still investigators in two separate agencies up until the time they made the connection. But I promise you that these folks, if they were worth their salt at all, and I have every reason to believe they were the best of the best, they were continuing to try to find threads to pull, to do something to move the ball forward, to just get a little more progress, and really hoping that someday that momentum would pick up to where you find people who have recollections that have not been heard before. You find physical evidence, you find corroborative evidence. And, it's, again, like in the wake of tragedy, there's still positives that come of it. If these cases have taught a new generation of investigators about the power of DNA, and if it has taught patrol officers and detectives across the country about the power of contributing DNA evidence to CODIS or any other system that can link DNA to other victims or other perpetrators, then your daughter's death certainly has paid a huge dividend towards improving the way we resolve these terrible cases. Because I know at the beginning of my career that contributing DNA evidence to a national database wasn't even a thing, but it certainly is now. And it's these victories, though, and I know it doesn't sound like a victory, but a victory of holding the offender accountable, even though he turned out to be a sick, twisted serial killer. The victory is that we now have powerful evidence that these databases work.
And I'm glad for that they have more tools than what they used to have to bring forth justice.
Indeed.
Your daughter's specific case wasn't tried, but you did attend the trial for Rachael and Warren's murders. And in going through that experience, that's a whole other thing. Why don't I just let you talk about that experience?
Well, it was Rachael's and Warren's trial that we had gone to. And the reason I did not pursue, because they had more evidence for Rachael and Warren than they did for Tina. So I figured, well, he had more of a chance of being convicted. So that's why we went with that. In the courtroom, I just looked at him because I wanted to see what type of person he really was, who could do all of this, just what type of person he could be. And I thought, well, he brought in the Catholic priest talking about, the priest said that he, not so much that he confessed, but that he had remorse and things like that. And I wanted to see that, but I did not see it, not one bit. I saw an arrogant person thinking, oh, well, when they executed him, they asked if he had any last words. All he could say was, "Let's get on with this." And I thought, okay, go to hell. Because unrepentant, that's where you're going to go.
And you definitely seem to me like someone who would give anyone the benefit of any doubt. Being a faithful woman, I can see that this kind of reflection of a human is not something that is common for you.
No.
I know that you're saying you observed his facial expression and the way his body position and the way he responded to things. Was there also any kind of like feeling, just in terms of like a vibe you got from him, or anything else that happened in the courtroom that contributed to your assessment?
To me, he was very cold.
If you or someone you know is connected either personally or as the result of violent crime to Alfredo Prieto, a convicted rapist and killer who lived in and around San Bernardino, California, Arlington, Virginia, and Jamaica, Queens, New York between the years of 1984 and 1990, we'd like to hear from you. Please email us at info@theheromakerpodcast.com.
You were describing seeing Alfred Prieto in person, and it struck me that you might have been looking for a reason to forgive him, and you couldn't find it. Am I misunderstanding?
No, you are correct. You are correct. Because I believe in forgiveness. I have been forgiven for many things. Not that, but different things. And the Bible teaches us, no one is perfect.
Right.
If God can forgive me, then I have to find some way to forgive someone that has done me an injustice. So that's what I was really looking for, but I did not see it.
So it sounds like this went beyond we are all poor, miserable sinners, and we all fall short of the glory of God. This sounds like maybe you saw Satan when you saw him, or that you saw someone who could not be godly at all.
You know what you said that, and what I thought at the time was, this is Satan incarnate.
And that's more than just a feeling. That's based on his whole demeanor and conduct, not just in the rapes and murders, but in the way he conducted himself.
Yes.
After he was apprehended.
Yes.
Right up till the moment of his execution.
Yes.
And you're not the only person who has said that. You're very open-minded going in there, it seems like, but you also were seriously wronged. Your daughter was wronged, like the most that anyone could be in a lifetime. But there were other people. The first officer who interviewed him on the West Coast when he was arrested for the murder of Yvette Woodruff told me that it was the closest he'd ever come to seeing the devil in his entire life. And this is a guy who's had a 30+ year career in law enforcement and seen some dark stuff. So it's not just your thought and opinion. There were other people who said similar things.
It was shared.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? And I ask this more as a Christian woman myself, as opposed to doing a podcast, but do you think that your inability to offer forgiveness because none was sought and it was not deserved and he was unrepentant, do you think that has impacted your life in any way? Would you have felt better, him going to his death, being forgiven by you, or does that matter to how you've handled things after his execution?
You know what? Even though through all the years when we knew nothing, I said, God knows. And if we don't get justice on this side, it will be done if he does not repent on the other side. When he sees God, justice will be brought forth one way or the other. And so to say that I believe I could have forgiven him, I just felt numb in that area. But I knew someday I would have to forgive him. Am I making sense?
No, you're making total sense. I think that you're also raising an important issue that for some people of faith, there is a greater justice system in play than just the American criminal justice system, and that even if there's not a satisfying outcome here on earth, that there is certainly justice in a different way that could be in the person's future.
Yes, I do believe that.
Well, I think you're incredibly brave, and I also can tell that had that guy given one reason to, or even asked for forgiveness, I feel like you're the type of person who would have. And it says so much about the person he was, and it makes me think of a couple, at least two jump to mind immediately, a couple of perpetrators that I had encounters with during my professional life, where I had the exact same spine tingling sense that you were in the presence of pure evil.
Evil, yes.
Yeah.
Have you been able to, are there people that you've been able to support having gone through this experience through the church or in community or in your family?
After it happened, Jeff and I, we both became members of a group called Parents of Murdered Children. And through that, there was a little comfort. But to me, I just could not just continue to sit there, but because there was bitterness also in some people in the group. And I just could not continue to listen to all of that and just be healed myself. So I dismembered myself from it. But in helping other people, there has been times when I was able to speak to people, even in not so much of as being murdered in that instance, but just the loss of someone. My husband had a young lady in his battery, in his company at the time, some years later, and she lost her baby. She miscarried. And so I was able to speak to her and hopefully give her hope and comfort in that area. So I try to choose my words when I'm speaking to people as to the need of, you don't have to rely on yourself. It's all right to grieve, but just don't stay there too long. And you're not by yourself. The Bible tells us to cast our cares upon the Lord because he cares for us. And if we do that, then that takes so much of the load and the worry off of us.
If you could say something to the police officers or others, it could be victim advocate or anyone who was involved in bringing your daughter's murderer to justice, who would be the heroes in your eyes in that process, and what would you want to say to them?
I think all of them would be heroes, especially the victim's advocate, Sally. I mean, going to a place that I knew no one at the time, she just really, really made us feel comfortable and did everything she could for us. So I would really, really like to thank her and the police officers, because without them continuously working the case, we would still be nowhere.
So you're talking about Sally Fayez, who is the director of victim services in the Fairfax district.
Yes.
And she's been awarded many times. So I would love to hear a few things from you about, what was her approach, or what were some of the things that she said or resources that she provided that really stood out to you.
She was very compassionate. She would make reservations for me to come up to DC. And if there was anything, she would be there when I got there, pick me up from the airport. And if there was anything that I needed, all I had to do was just ask her. She just went out of her way to be kind and really compassionate. I say she went out of her way, but.
Well, I'm guessing that there are some people who work in that area who don't pick people up at the airport or aren't on the other end of the phone at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, but also that is what that job, the victim services position, is designed to do, is to be of extraordinary support. And it sounds like she really takes her job seriously and goes above and beyond. But also, I mean, I would love some support making reservations. I mean, but for you to not have to think about those details,
Yes.
and just show up, and it's almost like she just took any kind of difficulty or hurdle out of your way, and was right there for whatever you needed.
Yes.
And
Yes,
it's a
she
true
did.
liaison for you. That's
Yes, she did.
really wonderful to hear. Janet, is that your understanding of what that role usually provides, or does that sound on par with what you've experienced?
That sounds on par with the very best victim advocates. I think you hit it on the head, Andy, when you mentioned that not all of them would show up at the airport. Some cases, I'm sorry to say, sometimes the more heart-wrenching or gruesome cases, then somehow we manage to provide a little more service, like picking someone up at a busy airport so they don't have to navigate a cab in the city or the metro in Washington, et cetera. In my experience, we have tremendous victim advocates at the prosecutor's office, but we always, at Burlington PD and Colchester PD, where I served my law enforcement career, we would assign a family liaison, and it was usually a detective or a police officer who was not the lead investigator on the case. So this was to provide an additional layer of support, but most importantly, to be able to provide an immediate conduit of information to the family so that they heard about developments or things from us before they heard it in the media. And of course, today it's a whole new animal. We have to get to the families before social media gets it, which can be instantaneous. It's a whole nother level of providing family liaison and advocacy services. But it sounds like this woman did just what she was supposed to do, and then a whole lot more. I'd be curious, Velda, if you could tell me a little bit about how she helped you navigate the justice system. I mean, she certainly took care of the logistics of getting you there, but in terms of the legal proceedings, can you tell me a little bit about how she helped you with that?
Well, she informed us about the prosecutors, the lawyers, and introduced us to them. And she was at the trial with us during the whole time.
Wow. So I assume you could ask her anything you wanted if you didn't understand what was happening during the proceedings, et cetera.
Yes,
That
because
must
she
have
was
felt,
right next to us.
yeah, and unfortunately it wasn't her first rodeo, right? So she was able to answer your questions and help you understand the process, as well as make it less inconvenient for you to have to come there.
Yes.
Well, sounds like we need more Sallys in the world.
Well, if the world worked like it should work, we wouldn't need Sally at all.
Oh, amen to that.
The Williamson County Cultural Arts Commission of Franklin, Tennessee wishes to thank our men and women in blue who help us deliver safe and fun family and community cultural events year-round, including one of the only authentic bluegrass festivals in the country. Bluegrass Along the Harpeth takes place every July, and at the Williamson County Fair in August, and at the annual Tennessee International Independent Film Festival. Check out our full calendar of events at wccac-tn.org.
In addition to your amazing Christian perspective that has brought you through this, if you could tell the world about Tina's legacy, how you would want her remembered, what would you want us all to know? Because I never had the privilege of meeting your daughter. I knew Rachael and Warren, but not your daughter.
She was a kind, loving, bubbly person. Since her death, many people had said that she was an inspiration to them. Like I said, we were in the military. And so one of my husband's friends had two daughters, which were younger than Tina. And so sometimes she would babysit them. And one of them decided, after she graduated and went to college, that she wanted to be like Tina. And today she is working in the CIA department, not as an accountant, but she's working for the CIA. And she had such a personality that even today, people speak very well of her lovingly and kindly, even to tears, because they knew her and the type of person that she was.
That's really beautiful and amazing, because I've seen many situations. I've spoken to a lot of people about death, not just this kind of, not murder, but also just, natural death. And this idea that you can kind of take a piece of who they were for you and have that now be part of your life. And the fact that that little girl absorbed, I want to go work for the CIA, that's so powerful. I do want to ask about your connection to the other families. I believe that you know and have connected with the Fultons. And I wonder if you also had connections with any of the other victims' families.
I used to hear about Lisa.
She was a survivor from an event on the West Coast. Yeah.
Yes, she was one of the ones that I think really put him where he is today.
Say a little bit more about that, because I'm guessing that you actually were there when she testified in Virginia.
I believe I was. Her and her mother were at a friend's house, and they decided, I believe it was, that they were going to leave there and go somewhere. So while they were in the house, Prieto and a couple of his friends broke in the house, kidnapped them, took them hostage, and out in nowhere. And
yeah, somewhere very remote.
Yes. And raped them and proceeded to kill them. I can't remember the other young lady's name.
Yvette Woodruff.
That's what it was, Yvette. I think it was Yvette that died, wasn't she? Didn't she?
Yes. Yeah.
He shot her, but then his friend, because Prieto had raped Yvette and shot her, and so then his friend was supposed to do the same to Lisa, but he didn't. I don't think he shot her. And so she played dead. And so they thought they were dead. Well, Prieto thought they were dead, so they left. And when they left, she went to get help. I think she tried to carry her mother to as far as she could, but to make a long story short, she was able to get the attention of someone at some plant or a foundry or something other, wherever they were. And she was rescued, and they took her to the hospital, and she was able to identify Prieto. And so that's how he was in jail all those years when we knew nothing of him.
So I'm guessing that some of this, maybe much of it, is new information for Jennifer. Had you heard any of that before?
No, I hadn't heard that, actually. I mean, I knew he was in jail at the time that they made the DNA connection.
Yes.
But I had not heard that particular story. And it raises so many questions for me that are for another day, I'm sure. But who was the accomplice of Prieto that didn't kill her? Because that would be an interesting story to hear. And was it 3 women that were abducted and taken out there?
3 women, and they were taken by 3 men. And then each man had a girl, and they weren't women. I mean, one was an adult woman, but the girls were like 15.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
each
they were
adult
teenagers.
male had one woman to rape, and then was supposed to be responsible for killing them.
Yes.
And was the young woman who was not shot,
they were stabbed. She and her mother were both stabbed.
Yes.
Was she able to save her mom?
Yes. The mom and the daughter both lived. And the daughter's name is Lisa, and that's who you were talking about, Velda. So you were in contact with Lisa for a while.
For a while, yes. And if I'm not mistaken, sometimes I still see her name, or she'll post stuff on Facebook about her grandchildren.
Wow.
And did you stay in contact at all with the Fultons?
For a number of years, and then out of the blue, it was before the pandemic, Mr. Fulton called me, and we talked, because they did not want to get involved with the aftermath of things. After the trial, it was like they were finished.
Yeah, I've never gotten to meet them, and I hope that along this path that I do get to meet them
And their
their
son.
son. I believe his name is Stuart.
Yes, I believe it was Stuart.
Velda, one of the things that is really important to us in doing this, bringing people together to recount these stories, is that there's a legacy of positivity and wisdom left for the future, so that everything that we've all been through has some meaning and, like I said, a positive legacy. What else is there for you to share? What would you like to provide that you haven't already for those listening in terms of being able to withstand the grief of events that of this proportion that may happen to them?
What comes to mind now is a Bible verse. And it says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And that kept me going. Regardless of what we go through, how hard it is, daylight is going to come through sometime or another, and it will be joyous.
Just drop the mic and stop recording right there, Andy.
Yes, it's very, very inspiring, Velda.
Super powerful.
Well, I just want to gush with warmth and gratitude for you, Velda. It is so wonderful to be connected to you, to have a relationship and a friendship with you. And you've been so generous with your time and with your experiences.
So thank you.
It's a real honor to have you. And I know that your voice is going to be very meaningful, and your words are going to be very meaningful to lots of people. So thank you so much for joining us.
And you know what, Velda, I'll tell you what, the heck with the podcast. You're an inspiration in your faith to me. So well done.
I appreciate that.
All right. Well, I hope God blesses you richly in your remaining years until you are reunited with your daughter.
I believe he is, and he has.
Velda,
Yes, ma'am.
I love you.
Oh, thank you. I love you too.
Thanks to audio producer, mixmaster, and sound designer Andy Bill of Submachine Audio. Thanks also to media producer Michael Doherty. And thanks to me, Hero Maker director and producer Andrea Schreeman. Please subscribe to the show where you listen to podcasts and take a moment to rate us. It really helps the podcast grow. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Hero Maker Pod. Want to collaborate or suggest a guest? Please email us at media@theheromakerpodcast.com. The Hero Maker Podcast is a production of Prudent Pictures. Thanks so much for listening.